This beautiful Sunday morning, I say to you, the Lord be with you. It's good as we come to this time, having fed upon the gifts of the Lord, to feed now upon His Word. And I would say September has been a month of hard work for us as a church family. We've spent the month working, thinking, wrestling, praying about forgiving those who have hurt us. And it has borne fruit. It is bearing fruit. And though we now change focus for the next month, as we will do each month, we'll have a different focus for each month. I don't want to pretend that the work that we've done just simply stops, that we'll continue on in the work of forgiving those who hurt us. In fact, on the back table in the information area, there's a flyer for a seminar called the Forgiveness Workshop, put on by Pastor Steve Deal in our own community. And if you're still needing some more in-depth work on this call to forgive those who've hurt us, let me encourage you to take one of those with you today and consider spending a Friday evening and a Saturday continuing to invest. We're going to turn our attention to another command of Jesus that I think if we understand it, we'll find just as challenging and just as hard. At the end of this year, by the way, we're going to be exhausted in an exhilarating kind of way as we're going after what does it mean? How do we get to the nitty-gritty of following Jesus' commands in our lives? How do we make discipleship not just intellectual assent to noble ideas, but the practice of our lives where it counts day to day? Like last month's theme of forgiveness, we're going to turn to Jesus' command to wash one another's feet. It's similar to last month in that Jesus models it, then tells us to do it, to do as has been done to us. And I want to read for us from John chapter 13, the story of Jesus washing his disciples' feet, from which this command comes. John chapter 13, I'm going to read verses 1 through 15. There are Bibles in the pews if you want to follow along, or listen keenly to this passage. John 13, 1 through 15. Now, before the feast of Passover, when Jesus knew his hour had come to depart out of the world. So it was during the Passover meal that we just celebrated. The communion comes from that same Last Supper. It was at that supper that this event happened. Knowing that his time had come to depart out of the world, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God, that he was going back to God, he rose from supper and he laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, he tied it around his waist, and then he poured the water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came around to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" And Jesus answered him, "What I am doing now you do not understand, but afterward you will understand." And Peter said, "You shall never wash my feet." And Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, have no share with me, Peter." And then Simon said, "Well then, Lord, not then only my feet, but my hands and my head." And Jesus, probably with a chuckle, said, "Listen, the one who is bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you." For he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, "Not all of you are clean." And when he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, "Do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you this example that you should do just as I have done to you." This is the word of the Lord. It is the clear command of Jesus that his disciples are to be foot washers. How many of you how many of you literally ever washed somebody's feet? How many of you have ever done that? How many of you have done that in the context of like a church service? Anybody had done like a foot washing church service? First thing that I want to say this morning is that we're called to imitate Jesus in foot washing, but I don't believe that Jesus was intending to enshrine the physical act of foot washing per se. So I want to say up front that I'm not planning on doing in the month of October some foot washing ceremony in the middle of church. And I'm saying that up front to ensure your attendance for the next 3 weeks. Having your feet washed is a difficult experience, a humbling and intimate, a difficult experience indeed. Partly that's because it's unfamiliar to us, partly it's because it's not part of our culture. Foot washing was, in fact, a very common part of the culture of Jesus' day when there were not paved roads and the feet were sandaled. And so dirty feet was a part of life. And to come into somebody's home, the custom was to offer them water to wash your feet with. Jesus comments that in Luke 7. He's at the home of a Pharisee named Simon when a woman comes in crying and wipes Jesus' feet with her hair. And Simon says, or thinks to himself, he wouldn't let this woman touch him if he knew who she was. And Jesus, who knows the hearts of people, says, Simon, let me say something to you. He says, when I came into your house, you did not even offer me water for my feet. We see just in that moment a common practice as it was to offer water to wash feet. In some households, it was the job of the servant or the slave of the home to wash feet, a very menial job indeed. But for us, in a day of shoes and paved roads, this is not part of our culture. So my fear is foot washing in this context sounds to us sentimental, kind of a cliched notion, and we don't take it seriously enough. So what I want to do this month is I want to lift up foot washing. I want to dissect it. I want to pull out the core principles inherent in what Jesus was doing so that we could extract those principles, translate them forward into the way that we're living life with one another. So that's our work, to see if we can rescue foot washing from sentimentality and bring it into the core practice of the discipleship community. All right? So that is our goal, and we're going to take the entire month to go after it. So today, I want to look at the act of foot washing as we see Jesus doing it, and I want to ask the question, what, if we were to reduce it down to its core principles, what would they be? What is Jesus actually doing? And I want to begin by noticing in chapter 13 that John precedes the whole event, the telling of the story of foot washing, with this statement. That knowing his hour had come to depart out of the world, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. I love that phrase. He loved them to the end. Then he begins to tell the story of Jesus washing their feet. So I'm understanding he loved them to the end as the leading sentence by which foot washing then is the example or the fulfillment of it. Further on, when we look at the end of chapter 13 and we watch Jesus sort of summing up this movement, we see him giving what we call the new command, the command to love one another, just as I have loved you. We see that in same chapter 13, verse 34. A new commandment, he says, I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you, you are to love one another. And this just as I have done for you, you are to do. It's this very same formula that he'll use at the end of the foot washing when he says, I've given you an example, just as I have done for you, you are to do to one another. My first point of the morning is that I want to root the act of foot washing in the foundation of loving one another. And you might think that's almost obvious. It almost goes without saying, but it's not obvious. Because here's the thing. It is so easy for us to do religious actions, pious actions, even humble actions, and we do them out of another motivation. The most insidious and common and guilty myself to do a humble action so that people will see you as humble. Now that's a tough one to sort of swirl around in your mouth and swallow that. Or to do an action because we're supposed to do it without regard for the person that we're doing it for. Or to do it to earn a kind of brownie point with God. Or there's many motivations that could cause us to do something that we might, from the outside, look like a foot washing action, but indeed it's not motivated, it's not in the context of loving this person who's before us. Therefore, I want to set the action in the call to love. Not only the call to love, but the call to love one another, John 13:34 says. And more specifically, what I think Jesus in this context is calling his disciples to love one another. Obviously, the church, and we in the church, are to love the whole world as God gives us opportunity, as we see in the parables of Jesus around the Good Samaritan and so on. But there is a specific way in which he's calling us to love one another in Christian community, or those in our family systems, those close to us. And you know why I want to emphasize that? Is because I think it's harder for us to wash feet of those close to us than it is those far away. Now, that might not be another thing that might not be immediately intuitive to you, but I know too many times I've gone on the mission trip, and boy, I have had a week of humble service. And I've gotten dirty and sweaty and had a great attitude the whole week. And then I come home and I grumble at the dishes in the sink. And I don't bend a feather to do some of that sort of humble service around my home, or those that I take advantage with because I know them so well. So I'm also noticing that this call to foot washing starts right at home, right here in our community. This way of addressing each other in love that's marked by this humble paradigm. Having said that, what I want to call us to in this month is both a readiness and a willingness to be foot washing people. Willingness means this, is that I understand the heart of it. I see it in Jesus. I assent to it with my mind. And in my will, I say, I want to be that kind of person. So I'm gonna set out. It is my intention to be a foot washing follower of Jesus. That's willingness. Readiness is a little different. You remember the disciples who were with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and they were trying to stay awake. They were willing to be with Jesus. They were willing, good intention to stay awake, but they didn't have the muscle to do it. And all spiritual practices, by the way, they take practice. They take muscle. They take working at it. And so readiness speaks of a lot of little actions that build up the muscle and stamina for us to be this kind of people. Sometimes we look for the golden bullet of Christian service, the one act that will sort of fulfill the mandate. Those tend to be actually inoculation shots. I've done my foot washing duty for the month. Thank God I can go back to being my selfish self. I mean, we would never say it that way, but there's something about practice that tends to lean in that direction. So willingness and readiness are what we're going after. And today, the rest of my time, I want to see if I can look at the act of foot washing as Jesus did it in John 13 and ask, what are the core components of it? How to translate them out into the practice of my own life today. I'm going to extract 3 observations that I think are fairly obvious, but I like to just name them and put them right out in front of our thinking for the month. And they are these: the willingness and the readiness to break rank, the willingness and the readiness to elevate someone over yourself, and the willingness and the readiness to get your hands dirty without benefit to yourself. I see these things fully present in the act of Jesus, laying aside his garments, bending down, and wiping the dirty feet of his disciples. Let me take them one at a time. The willingness and the readiness to break rank. We see this particularly in the response of Peter, who said to Jesus, "You wash my feet?" The wonder and amazement in Peter's question is rooted in the fact that Jesus is defying norm. The honored rabbis did not wash the feet of their disciples. Those in higher position did not wash the feet of those in lower position. Society has a hierarchy which sets expectations of how we're to act, and most of us tend to follow those subconsciously. To break rank. When I was practicing this, I kept saying rank. To break rank, that would be one of those things say 5 times really quick. Break rank. To break rank is to say there is nothing that is beneath me. Now, when I say nothing, I'm speaking of, you know what I'm saying, of things that humans do. There's nothing that other humans do that I cannot do. But here's what happens to us. We subtly live into an expectation around the positions that we all hold. And when I use the word position, I mean position like this. That you have position in society, in your home, in your world, in your workplace, sometimes due to your ethnicity, sometimes due to your gender, sometimes due to your economic status, sometimes due to your educational level, sometimes due to the birth order in your family, sometimes due to your job title and position, but we all have positions, and we tend to live within a certain range of expectations of what I get, the benefits from that, and what I'm obligated to do, and so on. Breaking rank says there is nothing that I am not willing to do. There's nothing beneath me. I was talking to a guy who used to be a principal, and he was telling me the story in his school that there was a child that was my examples of late have been so they're so base, but they're helpful to get at the heart of this. But this student was, how do I say it politely, was going to the bathroom on the floor of the bathroom repeatedly as an act of vandalism. And once again it had happened, and the principal came in, and the janitor was just so upset. And the principal said, "You go. Leave your tools. I'm the boss here. I'm going to clean this up." I love that story because typically principals order people around. You have janitors for that kind of work. But there was something in his DNA about a leader who says, I will not ask anybody to do what I'm not willing to do. He steps into that. He breaks rank in that particularly rank moment, right? But I love that. I love that notion of saying, I will defy the common expectation around my position in order to go low, to serve. I will not hang on my rank. I think of the story of Henry Nouwen, the great Catholic priest, writer, who has nourished so many of us with his writings. He lived his life largely in academia, was a professor at Notre Dame for a while, 10 years at Yale Divinity School, and his last 2 years at Harvard Divinity School. And something was missing in his heart. He took a sabbatical and went and served for 9 months in a community of disabled adults that lived in community together. While he was there, one of the members of that community had an accident and killed somebody outside of the community in a driving accident. He ended up pastoring that whole community through the crisis, and they said, would you consider coming and being a pastor among us? He felt the call of God, and he left the prestigious chair of being a professor at Harvard to go live the rest of his life in a community of disabled adults up in Ontario, Canada. His primary role was to be a buddy with Adam, to walk alongside of Adam. He wrote a book called Adam, God's Beloved. But I love that story because here was someone in a position that had certain expectations, and nobody would have ever faulted him for just staying right there, and yet he felt this call to leave that world and go be among the least of these for the rest of his life. Henry Nouwen. Breaking rank, then, is something about this foot washing call, what will it look like for you to break rank? What will it be beneath you to do in the encounters of your life this week? Breaking rank is one. The second one is elevating another person above yourself. Certainly, the very position of foot washing is that you're kneeling at feet and the person towers above you. It's a picturesque scene of the very truth that Paul will reiterate in Philippians chapter 2 when he says, consider others more important than yourselves. Chapter 2, verse 3. And I was intrigued by that word important. Some translations use more significant. How does that work? Are people really more significant than me, more important? The Greek word is just a little insight. It's kind of fun. Huper echo. Huper, where we get the word hyper, it's a preposition that means over. Echo means to hold. In its most technical form, it means to hold over. Paul is saying, consider holding others over you. That's the picture of foot washing. It means things like this, that I can let somebody else go first. It means that I can celebrate and rejoice with another person's success. It means pushing against the predominant me first, manage your own world first, get that all settled, and then when you're all settled and you're good, you'll maybe have some leftover energy to be nice to those around you. I mean, that's the way the rest of our world primarily thinks, without ever saying it quite so crassly. It's this idea, can I go unrecognized while somebody else gets recognition? These are all elements of this notion, also by Paul, summed up in Romans 12:10, when he says, outdo one another in showing honor. I love, there's a sort of a race metaphor there. Who can get to the finish line first? Not to be the glorious champion, but who can get to the finish line of honoring the other person more? Can you imagine a marriage that lived with Romans 12:10 as their motto? No, you go. No, you first. No, you first. No, you're better. No, you. No, you. No, you. Typically, most of our marriages are a little bit more, no, me. No, me. But me. But what about me? So there's this sense of, can we do this? Now, am I starting to touch something where we're getting a sense that foot washing just ain't so cute? That it actually gets at the very core of a way we think about living life relative to others, and it's not easy. My Uncle Jerry, who died a couple of years ago, my beloved uncle, covenant missionary for many years, teacher at North Park, was the guest of honor speaking at some place, and he got up and they introduced him and they called him the wrong name. And he didn't correct it in the moment. And afterwards, somebody came up to him and said, man, why don't you correct that? And he said, it doesn't matter. And they went on at his memorial service to tell story after story of Uncle Jerry, who used to say, it doesn't matter. And I love that became the way he was remembered, as someone who said, it doesn't matter. It's not about me. It's not about me getting known, my name being out there. It's not about that. There's something in that spirit that is so much like Christ. Here's the third thing that I see in Jesus washing feet, and that is this notion of getting my hands dirty. Because can you imagine touching dirty feet? It's just basically an unpleasant image in my head to touch. I don't particularly like touching my own feet. I really never want you to touch my feet. And that's typically because I'm slow to keep my toenails trimmed. I'm just going to let you know. It's one of I have to work on that. But all to say is this is sort of base business, this feet stuff, right? It's getting our hands dirty, the water's dirty, the whole thing's dirty. And yet Jesus, he does this washing, and there's really no benefit he carries away from it. Here's the thing about doing dirty things. We're willing to do dirty things. We put additions on our homes. We work hard for things that we want, but it's not so hard to do dirty work, hard sweat, sacrificial work for things that we're going to get something out of. But it's a lot harder to do it when there's just nothing in it for you. When there's sacrifice and giving up and loss of momentum, loss of money, loss of status. And typically our question is, what's the ROI? What's the return on investment? And foot washing says there's really not one. Jesus wants us to be people that can get our hands dirty, that can work, sweat, sacrifice, and hurt for the sake of the other without a clarified return on investment. Those are these three ideas that I see present. The very heart and the posture that Jesus is modeling for his disciples and thus modeling for us. And it goes against, I'm going to just tell you what, it is a radical countercultural call to almost everything that we'll see growing up on TV in the get ahead, be successful, take care of yourself culture that we live in. So our call this month is going to be to explore, how do I live into these attitudes? Again, as with everything that we talk about, there's nothing simplistic. Can't reduce it to a specific action. It takes wisdom to know how you do this well and balanced and healthy. But this is the call forward that we're going to live into. Next week, we're going to explore this notion. Humility is often associated with foot washing, but humility is one of the most confused attributes of the Christian disciple. And we're going to find out that false humility can be the very antidote to a foot washing kind of life. And we're going to try to dig deeper into understanding that next week. Let's pray and ask God to begin to open our eyes and hearts and teach us what it looks like to be these kind of people. Lord, as we are on the track of listening to your commands and trying to take them as seriously as we can and trying to unpack them down into a kind of detail that we cannot ignore, I pray that as we open up this window on foot washing, that you will lead us and challenge us into the posture that you yourself modeled most completely when you left heaven and did not count equality with God something to be grasped. But you emptied yourself and you took the form of a bondservant. And you humbled yourself even to death on a cross. And you call us to have this mind that was in Christ Jesus. Toward that end, we set ourselves ready to hear you and ready to obey. In Jesus' name, amen.